So this is the final part of our mini-series on things having to do with the end of days and the world to come. We saw yesterday the first part of the world to come, where we were exploring things like when will the world to come actually occur? Where will it occur? Questions like who's going to get there and how? Is there no hope? Or would these people have a chance of getting to the world to come? And we discussed how, yes, there are ways in which even a person who would be barred on his own merit from earning the world to come, nevertheless could get there through the merits of others. For example, children or other relatives or students or so forth and so on, that the person left behind, who would actually be acting and doing things on behalf of the departed, which would help their spiritual elevation, which might ultimately enable them to get to the world to come. We also then discussed what would actually happen at the time of resurrection, when these bodies, in an earlier section, which we described, will be coming out of the ground, and we described in great detail how that actually happens. But once the bodies have been formulated, we raised the question, which is, what are people going to do? And we saw sources say that they're going to break forth in song. They might even be making a special blessing in honor of the resurrection, which would be like the blessing we say now. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, mechayeh mesim. We said the Gemara talks about making this bracha even when two people in this world haven't seen each other for a whole year. So all the more so, two people who have been separated by death, and as long as that was, and then became reunited after resurrection, presumably they would be making this bracha. And we saw a midrash which talks about how Yitzchak, when he was brought back to life after the sacrifice, also made this bracha. We also explored the notion of there being a great day of judgment at the time of resurrection, and the question as to why should there be such a judgment. Presumably, the bodies were judged in death and decay. The souls were judged in the spiritual realm. The decision was made that a person merit resurrection, in which case, when that resurrection takes place, what's being judged? One take that the commentaries have is that the judgment is taking place on those who do not deserve resurrection, and they're being resurrected in order to see the people that they persecuted, or the ideas which they ridiculed, are actually vindicated and proven to be the right path. So these people will be judged because of the persecution and the heresy that they professed when they were living. Another interesting explanation that we saw is based on something that we had seen in an earlier session, which is that regarding the question as to what's going to happen to people who are living at the time of the resurrection, what is going to happen to them? Anybody who's buried and merits being resurrected will be reconstructed from the ground. We discussed even the righteous, whose bodies might not fully decay because of their righteousness, would still have to go through an instantaneous decay in order to prepare their bodies fully for a resurrected body. What's going to happen with those people who are alive at the resurrection? The sources say that they will all die, be instantaneously decomposed, and then raised in order that they should have bodies that merit the period of the resurrection. So according to this, the great day of judgment is going to be the judgment which God makes upon all of these people that are alive at the time of resurrection and did not have the opportunity of having their bodies judged through burial, their souls judged through Gan Eden, but rather the whole process has to be sped up and done instantaneously for those. That will be the great judgment. Right? That God is judging among those who are living at the time of resurrection who should die and be resurrected into the world to come and who should not. Very interesting discussion. And then there was a last point which we really didn't cover, which is nevertheless quite interesting. We should probably cover before we go on for today's material, which is, what about the question of overpopulation in the world to come after resurrection? You're going to have all of these bodies popping out of the ground. Yeah, and the earth is going to become full of, as if there's not always enough room in the world for everybody in one generation. What about all of those who are resurrected from all generations? There seems to be an overpopulation concern. So here, there's a famous commentary, Rav Saadia Gaon, in a work that he wrote, which is Amunus Videos, and he makes a particular calculation that the world to come will actually be extensive enough to accommodate all of the people who are resurrected, and there will not be an overpopulation problem. The opinion is explained by someone called the Mabit in his work called the Beis Elokim, and his calculation is basically as follows, that the sources seem to indicate that in the world to come, the land of Israel will be 500 times greater than it currently is. Now, I don't understand that to mean that the current borders of Israel will somehow be increased 500-fold, but rather the chazon, the vision of the greater land of Israel be realized, so that the land of Israel will extend literally from the Euphrates all the way down to the Nile, north, south, east, and west. The land area, which will be the land of Israel, will be much greater, so that any of the righteous Jews that lived in any of the times in history will be resurrected and have enough land mass in the greater land of Israel, to live. One interesting point is that this implies, according to this opinion at least, that those that will be resurrected specifically will be Jews. Jews will be resurrected, non-Jews not. Remember, in a previous session, we spoke about that discussion, where the Midrash says a day of rain is greater than that of resurrection. A day of rain is for all people, Jews and non-Jews. Resurrection is only for the Jews. However, we saw that one of the commentaries there, I believe it was the Yofer Torah, says that it doesn't literally mean Jews. It means anybody like the Jews who are doing the will of God. So that non-Jews who are like Jews, insofar as they're doing the will of God, and not like idolatrous non-Jews who are not, they will also be resurrected. According to this, then, we said, Jews and non-Jews, as long as they're righteous and doing what they're supposed to be doing, will be resurrected. According to this calculation, it would seem he's going of the opinion that no, only Jews would be resurrected and not non-Jews. The point is, however, that as we saw there, the Gemara itself says that non-Jews have a portion in the world to come. And since the world to come is very often referring to the world of resurrection, that would imply that righteous non-Jews have access not only to the spiritual world, but also the world of resurrection, which is really the world to come as well. And it kind of makes sense. If non-Jews receive reward because of their righteousness and get to the spiritual realm, then why would their reward be limited to that? It would seem, therefore, that just like Jews who merit going to Gan Eden and then would also be resurrected, so righteous Gentiles would, if they get to heaven, would also be privy to the merit of resurrection. In which case, that would bring the question back again. When we're trying to reckon about whether there's going to be enough room in the world for all of the resurrected righteous, it really is taking consideration not only the Jews, but even the non-Jews. In which case, you have your population problem again. Unless you want to say that there weren't really that many righteous non-Jews throughout history that it would make a difference. But I don't know. In any case, there are going to be a lot of people popping out of the ground. Is there going to be enough room for everybody? So according to one approach, yes, there will be. However, according to others, like Rav Yaakov Emden, in terms of numbers, there won't be enough space. There won't be enough space, physically speaking. So how is everybody going to fit into the world to come? Yeah, and the answer is it's going to be miraculous. And he gives a precedent for this. Our sources tell us that when the millions of Jews converged to Jerusalem on the festivals, the pilgrimages, there were so many people there. By the way, the Gemara says that the hillsides in the middle of the summer looked like they were snow-capped, because all of the pilgrims were bringing their sheep and their goats, and they were herded around the mountains surrounding Jerusalem, so it was all white, and it looked like they were snow-capped. And there were so many people that when they went into the Temple Mount in order to do their prayers and their sacrifices, they were packed in there so much that for every 3 people, 2 had their feet on the ground, but a third was actually lifted off the ground. That's how packed they were. Yeah? However, when they bowed down in order to pray to God, they heard the divine name being pronounced, Yud, Hey, and Vav, and Hey, and each one bowed down in humility before God, supplicating and directing their own personal private prayers to God. The Gemara says that a miracle took place, And as many people as they were, there was enough room for everybody to lie down, flat out, supplicating in humility before God. And there was enough space left between peoples that nobody could hear the confessions of his fellow Jew. So he says, just like in those times, there was not enough room for everybody, but when they went in that spiritual state of submission before God, there was miraculous enough space for everybody, so too in the world to come, God will accommodate all of the people who merit resurrection, and there will be miraculous enough space for everybody. It's interesting that a lot of it has to do with humility. If a person acts with humility, yes, then these types of things can take place. The language that's used in our sources is oimdim skufim mishtachavim ravachim. When they were standing up, they were like squashed, but when they bowed down, there was room for everybody. What this means is when a person's trying to assert himself, right, there's not enough room for everybody who's trying to assert themselves. But if people will just bow down, act humility, right? So act humbly, there'll be enough room for two. If you try and take two people fighting over two places, there's not going to be enough for either of them. But three people who are interested in everybody sitting down can put the three people in two seats. Yeah? Why? Because each one's making room for the other. You can actually, two people who are fighting over a spot don't have enough room for two seats because each one's pushing the other one out. Three people can make room even in two seats. So humility, therefore, is a key ingredient in earning the world to come, and also making a space for a person, making place for a person there as well. Pirkei Avos mentions this teaching that we were talking about, that the throngs would gather. As long as they were standing, they were squashed, but as they bowed down, miraculously they had room. But there's another midrash in Tanhuma which gives another precedent for this, and this is based on a verse in which God tells Moses, gather the people to the tent of meeting. And Moses says to God, is it possible that I gather the entire people to the house of meeting? How can you fit 600,000 men and 600,000 women and all of the children, all of the young people? How can we fit all of those people into an area which is nothing more than the size of like a large field? So God responds, the Midrash says, to Moshe and says, it's true, physically speaking, there's not enough room for everybody, but miraculously, we'll make room. You call the people, and as many people are interested in coming, we'll make room and fit them in. And this is based on a verse in which God says, so too in time to come, will I do the same in Zion. All the world's population from Adam until the resurrection. By the way, this source seems to imply that non-Jews will also be resurrected. Why? Because it says all of the people from the time of Adam until resurrection. And there was a lot of world history, that includes a lot of world history when there were no Jews at all. So, just like the Midrash says, God miraculously made room for all of these people to fit into the courtyard of the tabernacle, so too in the time to come will I do the same in Zion. All the world's population from Adam until resurrection, where will they stand? And they will come and complain, as it says in the verse, Isaiah 49. The place is too narrow for me. Move over for me, so that I can have place to dwell. God says, what will I do for them? I will broaden it for them, as it says in the same verse, in the same Isaiah, chapter 54. Widen the place of your tent. Right? Widen the place of your tent. The world is God's tent. God says, I will widen the place of my tent so that everybody who merits resurrection from the time of Adam until the time of resurrection will find room there. Very interesting point. The next thing that I want to cover has to do with what is life going to be like in the world to come in terms of just daily living. Will there be eating in the world to come? Will there be drinking in the world to come? Will there be relationships in the world to come? What about things like Torah learning and Torah observance? What's their role going to be in the world to come? So the first thing is regarding eating and drinking. There's a Gemara in Brachos which says that Rav teaches that the world to come is not going to be like this world. The world to come, there's not going to be eating, there's not going to be drinking, and there is not going to be procreation. This Gemara in Brachos is from page 17a. Rather, nor will there be commerce or competition or jealousness or anger Rather, the righteous are going to be sitting with crowns on their head and basking in the glory of God. So it would seem from this teaching that the world to come, we're being told explicitly, is going to be a place where there's no eating and no drinking. However, the Rambam explains that, understands that this teaching is actually not going on the world of resurrection. The Rambam, which some of us saw recently, actually explains this Gemara as referring to the world of souls that we spoke about earlier. And the Rambam is therefore saying, this world to come, which is the world of souls, there won't be eating, drinking, or procreation. Nor will be there any of the type of negative attributes that people have in this world. Why does the Rambam explain that this teaching is going on the soul world? Because he says, if it's talking about a realm where there are bodies, then what would be the purpose of having bodies which don't function as bodies? Why do you have to have a body if the body isn't eating or drinking or doing other bodily functions? Rather, the Rambam says it must be that this teaching is referring to the soul world and not the world of resurrection. That results in an interesting implication. What that means is that according to the Rambam, who certainly agrees with the idea of resurrection, where there will be bodies, will those bodies be eating? According to the Rambam? Yes. Will they be drinking? Yes. Will they be involved in intercourse? Intimacy? Yes. Why? Because the Rambam's whole premise is that there's no reason to have a body if it's not being used. Therefore, if we're told in the world to come there won't be bodily functions, it must be talking about a realm where there are no bodies, namely the soul world. But by implication, what that means is that according to the Rambam, that when there will be resurrection and there will be bodies, there will be bodily functions. Yeah? So according to the Rambam, there will be eating, there will be drinking, and the implication is that there will be cohabitation between husband and wife as well in the world to come. The majority of the other commentaries we pointed out don't understand the Gemara in the same way that the Rambam does. They say that that Gemara which says that in the world to come there's not going to be eating or drinking or other bodily functions, that's not referring to the soul world, because they would say if that's the case, that's obviously, that's patently obvious. If you're talking about a soul world where there's no bodies, then you don't have to come and tell me there are no bodily functions. Of course there are no bodily functions if there are no bodies. Rather, they say the teaching must be telling you the following novelty, which is the world to come is not going to be like this world. Even though the world to come is a physical world like this world is, so there's a point of comparison between the two. Nevertheless, in the world to come, there are going to be bodies without eating or drinking or other bodily functions. The Rambam asks, if there are bodies, what's the point of having bodies if there are no bodily functions? Yeah. So they address this problem, the Rambam, by saying the point is as follows, is that the body helps the soul achieve its elevation, its perfection. Ultimately, that takes place in the reward that's given in the world to come. Part of the world to come involves the soul world, where the soul alone without the body is going to receive its reward in heaven. But the body itself also contributed to that perfection. Why shouldn't the body receive its reward as well? Therefore, they say that resurrection, at least initially, is in order to reward both the soul and the body for their joint role in bringing about the perfection that the person earned in order to gain the world to come. What's the point of having the body then without the bodily functions? The point is that this now becomes a spiritualized body where the body itself derives benefit from basking in the glory of God. It's kind of like spiritual sunbathing, yeah? Where the emanence of God's light is radiating into the world and the body is deriving some benefit from the presence of God. And this body, which is subsisting on soul food, that's the energy of God that's being brought into the world, will not need food. It won't need drink. And people won't be cohabitating either. Why? Because these are spiritualized bodies. These are spiritualized bodies that won't need food and drink. And it would be akin, for example, to the precedent that we saw in the Torah where Moses is described as going into Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights without eating or drinking. That's only a temporary situation. Even though it was attained by Moshe, it wasn't sustained by him for his whole life, only during those 40 days. But the world to come, which is the world of resurrection, which will be the realm in which the body is going to be resurrected, in that plane, all humans, according to most commentaries, will have a soul-body combination, but that body is going to be a spiritualized body, receiving its reward from God in a spiritual sense, and therefore won't need to have food or drink. Next point that the commentators make has to do with married life. Meaning, if we go, for example, according to the explanation of the Rambam, there in resurrection will be bodies. Those bodies will have bodily functions, which will include eating and drinking, and also opens up the possibility that there will be interaction between people on a physical level, husband and wife, and an intimate level as well. What will there in fact be a male-female relationship? What will happen to married life in the world to come? Are couples who are married here in this world, will that marriage, that relationship be sustained in the world to come or not? So the implication is that, yes, that the married life will continue, but it's not necessarily going to be between husband and wife as they were in this world. Rav Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, a great scholar in the 1800s from Iraq, is of the opinion that when people die, let's say the couple dies, their bodies are decayed and totally disintegrated. That dissolves the marital bond between husband and wife as well. So that through death and decay, the relationship is completely severed, and that would seem to imply that if the husband and wife are reunited in resurrection, they would have to reinstitute their marriage, yeah? And they would not be resurrected into their married state. Why? Because the relationship was dissolved through death. Once that relationship is reinstated, will there be this kind of living together as husband and wife? So again, I guess it's going to depend on the different way of looking at it between the Rambam and the others. According to the Rambam, who says that if there's the body's going to be used, that implies that if there's going to be a male-female husband-wife relationship, there's also going to be an active intimacy involved in that relationship. It could very well be that there will be no procreation, according to the Rambam. The husband and wife will be intimate, but there won't be any procreation, or maybe there will be. I don't know. The Rambam would say they would eat and drink. The bodies will be sustained, so maybe procreation there will be as well. But it would not seem to be the case, because anybody who's in the world to come lives eternally, yeah? And there's no need to bring, and the only people who are there are the ones who deserve to be there. So they'll interact as husband and wife, perhaps even be involved in intimacy, but not necessarily procreate. Yeah.
When you're resurrected, would you be brought back into the world as the age that you died, or as like a more younger age?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Something we actually touched upon in an earlier meeting, which is, and there's actually a different opinion about that. According to one opinion, the bodies will be resurrected initially as they were when they died, with their age and infirmity and sickness, and then miraculously restored to the prime state of health of a 20-year-old. According to another opinion, no, the body will be initially and immediately resurrected in that primal state. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's say you're pregnant, and then the world to come, I guess, starts. Like, first off, is there an official starting day of the world to come?
Uh-huh.
And this, like, the days that Mashiach brings? And second, like, would the fetus be born into the world to come?
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. I mean, if the person is pregnant as resurrection occurs, then based on what we've seen, that person and her fetus will die, it would seem, and then be resurrected. The question is, if she merits resurrection, then she would be resurrected. But the fetus we can't really say that the fetus merited it, because it never did anything, so maybe it wouldn't. On the other hand, just like a mother, when she's pregnant, a woman who's pregnant converts, her child converts together with her, because it's considered to be part of her body, so too perhaps if she merits resurrection in this state, the child will also merit to be resurrected as a part of her body. Yeah? So that's a very interesting question. And I haven't seen anything written about it. It's a very novel insight. Yeah.
What about a husband or wife who had their spouse die?
Very good. I was going to say, that sounds like, you could say that sounds like a pretty far out question. Who would discuss this? But there is a whole responsa about these types of questions in a book called Rav Polim, which was also written by this Ben Ish Chai, Rav Yosef Chaim in Baghdad. And there he asks the types of questions, and not only he, but others address your question as well, which is, what about a situation where, assuming husband and wife are resurrected, and they do reinstate the marriage, either automatically through resurrection, or they have to reinstate it through marriage. But what would happen in a scenario where, let's say, they were with two people who were married, but at the time of death were no longer married? What would happen there? So that would take, let's say, two basic forms. You can have a scenario where, for example, a person was married to a woman, and then she died, and then he remarried a second time, and then all three are resurrected. Or you can have a scenario where he was married, they got divorced, and then he remarried. So in the first scenario, the original marriage was dissolved through death, and the second through divorce. There might be a difference there. Right? According to what we saw earlier, at least according to Ben Ish Chai, since death and decomposition totally breaks the bond of marriage, you could say that in the scenario where a person was married to one woman, and then she died, he married another woman, and then they all died, and then they were all resurrected, he could marry either one he wanted. Why? Because his relationship with the first wife was completely dissolved through death and decomposition. So since that marriage has been dissolved, he could theoretically marry the second one, or the first one. Perhaps he would have his choice. Yeah?
Or a concubine.
There is that possibility. I suppose, it might go to address your point, we'd probably go the other way around. There was a couple who was married, the husband died, and now the wife remarries. Okay? So she was married to one husband and then another husband, and all three are resurrected. Which husband would she go back to, as it were? She can't have both. Okay? So one way of looking at it would be that the marital bond would be dissolved with the disintegration of the body, in which case she could marry either one. Correct? However, since she was married to somebody else a second time, perhaps she would not be able to, in the resurrected world, reunite with her first husband, because that might be akin to what we find in the Torah, that if a man divorces his wife and then she lives with another man, the first one cannot take her back because she lived with another man in the meantime. There's a mitzvah to remarry a person's divorcee. But if his divorcee already married somebody else, not only is there no mitzvah, there's actually a prohibition against remarrying her. So in this scenario, in a way, she's kind of been with another man in the meantime, right? We're questioning whether he can remarry her after resurrection. So the answer might be no. Why? Because how can he remarry her if she's been married to another man instead? Yeah. However, the commentaries actually make this point, but some are of the opinion that since, according to the Ben Ish Chai, the marriage relationship is entirely dissolved with disintegration, so the fact that she was married to somebody else in this lifetime would prevent her first husband from taking her back in marriage this lifetime. But if they're separated by death, as we say, until death do we part. What? Is that how it goes? Yeah? Death will actually cause them to depart, in which case the second marriage would not be like a case of her remarrying or his taking back his divorcee, because that second marriage would be totally dissolved. In which case, he could perhaps take her back in the world to come, even though she's been married to somebody else in the meantime, because that's not in the same lifetime. It's a totally different lifetime, and the relationship we had with that second husband would be totally dissolved. What were we going to say?
If we poskin like the Rambam, then all these things sort of apply. Like we have bodily functions. We have the man living with the woman, and then whoever was the last wife, then it goes to that, et cetera, et cetera. But if we poskin like the others, we're kind of making an assumption about the world to come that it's going to have the same intricacies, right? So we're assuming that the same mitzvahs are going to apply. We're assuming that we're going to be eating in the same way. We're assuming that we're going to be reproducing, and the laws of marriages are going to be the same. Like the kedushin will look completely different in the world to come. Does anyone write about?
We're going to see shortly. We're going to see shortly to what extent, let's say, Torah and mitzvahs apply in the world to come, and the point you're making would be very relevant there. So let's hold that for now and see once we get there and try and factor that in.
I think it could be a little bit of an explanation for the conversation we're having.
Right. In other words, if the Torah laws are suspended, then it would not necessarily be a problem. Yeah, but
I'm not saying there's no Torah. I'm just saying it looks different.
Right, looks different. Right. That's a possibility. Yeah. The one interesting point that's made regarding this is that arguably there's a difference between whether the original marriage was dissolved by death or by divorce. So that everything we've been speaking about so far would be applicable when the marriage was dissolved by death. However, if the marriage was dissolved by divorce, it could be a totally different scenario. Because there what you would have is, for example, a man was married to a woman, and then they got divorced. And then she married somebody else. So, when they're all three resurrected, the question is, who would she be married to if it's one of the two, the first husband or the second husband? Here, arguably, we should say, even if death doesn't dissolve the relationship, but divorce certainly does, when they got divorced, basically, the husband and wife severed their spiritual relationship. They severed their spiritual relationship. So that even if we were to say death does not dissolve that spiritual relationship, and it's reinstituted when they come back to life in the spiritual realm, but if in this world they spiritually severed their relationship by making divorce, then clearly she should not go back to the first husband. She should go back to the second husband. Yeah? She should go back to the second husband. Why? Because that was her main husband in her life. She never severed the relationship, according to in this scenario, with him. Right? Death is what dissolved their relationship. So she should go back to the second husband. There's an interesting source which is brought for this, which is the Zohar in Breshis, which says as follows. When Jacob died, his body was buried in the Holy Land. But for Moses, no part of his body was buried in the Holy Land. Why? Because Jacob was the first husband of the Shekhinah, right? That was Jacob. But after Jacob died, she mated with Moses, meaning the Shekhinah was unified with Moshe. While Moses was in this world, he visited her as was proper, and he became her second husband. There was like a male-female, husband-wife relationship between Moshe and the Shekhinah. This was after Yaakov had already died. But when he died, that is, Moshe died, Moses remained outside. Neither his body nor his bones entered the land. Instead, the Shekhinah entered the Holy Land after Moshe died, and she returned to her first husband, who was Yaakov. From this we learn that a woman who is married to two men in this world, and in the world to come, she will return to who? The first or second husband? The first husband, right? The first husband. But again, arguably that would only be when there was no divorce. If there was divorce, it would be a different scenario. But since Yaakov never divorced the Shekhinah, when Yaakov died, the Shekhinah married someone else, that's Moshe. And Moshe became the Shekhinah's second husband, as it were. But after Moshe died, the Shekhinah went back to her first husband, that is Yaakov. I don't know exactly what this means in a deeper spiritual sense, but the dynamic of the relationship between husband and wife is pretty clear from this Gemara, that their lasting spiritual relationship, implying the one that will be operative in the world to come as well, is going to be the one that was operative in the first marriage, and that's usually described as what we call the zivug rishon, as opposed to the zivug sheni, the secondary zivug, the secondary soulmate. Yeah. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I think that's an interesting question. So, like the difference between like biblical laws and rabbinical laws, and how like the rabbinical laws like made everything more strict. So Yaakov married Rachel and Leah in reversed order, and then he married two others, but mainly with Rachel and Leah. Today, like that wouldn't be allowed because you can't marry two sisters. So I consider the case where two cousins marry, two cousins by blood. Today, that is not allowed by rabbinical law, but it is allowed by biblical law. So if they're resurrected and they both died married, would they be allowed to get back together?
Interesting. I'm not aware, as far as I know, cousins can get married. So I'm not sure what you mean by
Well,
that.
like something
Rabbinically?
that used to be allowed,
Yeah.
but is no longer
Okay,
allowed.
yeah. Take a scenario where the Torah permits the union, but the rabbis don't, right? So you're asking, then what? In the time of resurrection, would the resurrection use the Torah law or the rabbinic law? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Right. Would the laws of the resurrected world go according to the Torah law or the rabbinic law? Very interesting question. Yeah, phenomenal, very insightful question. I really don't know how to answer that.
And then
Because clearly the Torah law is the operative law. On the other hand, the rabbinic law is enforced by the Torah as well, and we're not allowed to deviate it from right or left. And that would seem to suggest that even in the world to come, the rabbinic laws will be operative.
So would Yaakov not be allowed to enter with Rachel and Leah still?
So when Yaakov, very nice. I think there's a discussion here. He's raising another interesting point, right? So according to this, Yaakov's resurrected. What do we do about Rachel and Leah? Yeah, and the same thing with Zilpah and Bilhah, because as far as I know, they were also sisters. Yeah, and I think there's one opinion that says that they were actually all four sisters, but not necessarily from the same parents. But in any case, it's certainly the question would apply to Yaakov and to Rachel and Leah. Did I remember seeing anything about that?
He's buried next to one of them, but not the other three.
Yeah. That kind of is reminiscent of what we saw here in the Zohar, about Moshe being buried in the. Yaakov specifically is one who's buried in the land of Israel in order to be able to continue to mate, as it were, with the Shekhinah, whereas Moshe had to remain outside. So too here, Yaakov is buried with Leah, but not with the others. Maybe. But in any case, very good question. What do you think? What would you say?
I don't know. I just wanted to hear the answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah.
I'm curious what would happen if prophets are resurrected, because we lost the ability for prophecy with the destruction of the second temple, correct?
Right.
So if they're resurrected, do they maintain the ability?
Well, actually, no, not with the destruction of the second temple. It would seem from the sources that we lost prophecy at the construction of the second temple.
Sorry.
Yeah, the construction of the second temple.
Yeah.
Why? Because the sages prayed for the abolition of the drive for idolatry, and the answer was that that would mean eliminating spirituality. And that was done at the beginning of the second temple as a safeguard that the second shouldn't be destroyed for the same reasons that the first one was, namely idolatry. So it's from that point on that the prophecy tapered off. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, those prophets that preceded the loss of prophecy, would they have that ability again once they returned, or would that automatically?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Although I think in the general scheme of things, not only would those prophets attain that level of prophecy, even the inferior secondary prophets would receive that level of prophecy, and even non-prophets would get that. Talk about a non-profit organization? No, this will not be that. Yes, the world to come will be a profitable endeavor for everybody, meaning everybody who is born into that realm will be on the level of prophets. Yes. It will be a very profitable, operation. Let's try and, in the time we have left, cover off this last interesting question about Torah and mitzvahs. Will Torah and mitzvahs apply? And it might address at least some of the things that you guys raised here in questions. The written Torah, the Rambam writes in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, chapter 9, it is clear and explicit in the Torah that the Torah is an eternal commandment. It lasts forever. It is not subject to change, nor subtraction or addition. As it says in Deuteronomy, these revealed things apply to us and our children forever, that we must fulfill all the words of this Torah. Behold, you learn from here, the Rambam says, that the entire Torah will imply forever, and we are commanded to keep it forever. This implies, therefore, that the obligation to keep the Torah will apply in some level, even as we understand it now, forever, even into the world of resurrection. However, the Rambam also writes in Hilchos Megillah that regarding the other parts of the Tanakh, not the Torah, not the 5 books of Moses, but the other books of Tanakh, all of the books of the prophets and all of the holy writings will be dissolved in the days of Mashiach. No Nevi'im, no Ksuvim at the time of the Mashiach. The exception, he says, is the book of Esther, which has its own reasons, right, which we won't go into now. But that means that the vast majority of the supplemental Torah literature beyond the 5 books will not be operative even from the times of the Mashiach. The only difference is going to be that we will have the 5 books of Moses and the legal rulings of the oral Torah, of the Talmud, and that will never be revoked. Okay? So according to the Rambam, we will always have the Torah and the legal discussions of the Talmud. But everything else in the Talmud and all of the other writings in Tanakh, we won't have. Right? Why is this? What's the reason for all of this? So the reasons for giving is as follows. The words of the prophets were really given for 2 reasons. Either to clarify things that were in the Torah and extend their application, or to admonish the people for not living up to what they're supposed to be doing. During the times of Mashiach, and certainly at the time of resurrection, people will not need that anymore. Why? Because the meaning of the Torah will be so clear and pristine that we will not need any of the writings of the prophets to tell us what the Torah is really saying, nor will people have the Yetzer Hara to transgress, so they won't need the admonitions. And therefore, all that you'll need is going to be the rules about how to do it, which is the written Torah and that part of the oral Torah which tells you what to do. But all other parts of the oral Torah, which are more in the realm of belief or of history or anything like that, it's not necessary. People have a very prophetic level of belief just by virtue of the fact that they are resurrected. And therefore, there will not be any need for these types of things. Regarding the oral tradition, the Rambam says it's specifically the legal rulings that we'll have, and not all of the other forms of the oral Torah. That implies that even the legal discussions of the Talmud will be abrogated, will be abridged, so that you will not have all of the back and forth of the oral Torah, and you won't have the machlokas in. You'll actually have more like a Shulchan Aruch, yes, a code of law, where the legal decisions that the Talmud reaches are what we're going to study, but not the actual discussions how to get there. Why? Because people who are engaged in Torah simultaneously see all of the different facets of Torah, and there's no reason to flesh out those arguments during the period of resurrection. Rather, all you have to do is put forth the laws and the teachings themselves. What about the mitzvos? Will they apply? On the one hand, you say, well, if the Torah teachings apply, that would seem to indicate that the requirement to keep those teachings will apply. However, that's not necessarily the case. As I think you suggested, there might be, there certainly are different levels of Torah than what we operate on. And in that level, we actually might be connecting to those deeper levels of Torah and not necessarily through the realm of practice. So we might be learning Torah, but in that realm, you're not learning the aspect of Torah which is associated with the execution of the Torah, but rather with the ideas of the Torah. So you might be learning about a particular mitzvah on its deeper level, which is really not about binding a blue thread around white threads and putting on the corner of a garment. It means something else. Okay? So that's our question here. Even if there is the body of wisdom that we call Torah, is that necessarily going to be translated into the performance of mitzvos? Okay? So, according to the Rambam, I suppose it's not really a question, because according to the Rambam, the world to come, well, according to the Rambam, certainly, of course there will be a world of resurrection. So the question will be, even according to the Rambam, when there are resurrected bodies, will they be performing the mitzvot or just learning about the Torah? So there's a Gemara in Nida, page 61, which says that brings a teaching that a person may be, a dead body may be clothed in a garment which is called kilayim. Kilayim is a forbidden mixture of linen and wool. The Gemara goes on to say that not only may the body be enclosed in the shroud, it can actually be buried with such a shroud as well. And it's from here that the Gemara deduces, at least according to one opinion, you see from here that the mitzvos will be negated at the time of resurrection. Why? If it's one thing that the dead body be clothed with this forbidden garment as long as it's being transported to burial, it's a dead body. It doesn't therefore have the prohibition of kilayim. But if you're going to bury it, and it's going to come out of the ground with that clothing, it's going to be wearing kilayim, which would be a prohibition. Either you see from here, the Gemara deduces, it must be that the obligation of performing the mitzvos or the prohibition against transgressing it will not apply at the time of resurrection. It's an interesting point. There's another teaching, however, in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which we saw in an earlier segment, which brings as a proof for the idea of the Jewish belief in resurrection, that we're told in the Torah that you shall bring forth the heave offerings and the tithes to Aaron a Kohen. The Gemara asks, does Aaron a Kohen live forever? That the Torah should speak in the present and say, you Jews for all generations shall bring your tithes to Aaron. It would be one thing if it said to Aaron and his descendants, but it doesn't say that. It says to Aaron. So the Gemara deduces from this, you see, that Aaron will be resurrected, and the Jews will be bringing the tithe offerings to him. Right? This is used on the one hand as a proof for resurrection in the Torah. It's talking about a scenario where people will be giving tithes to Aaron at some time in the future. However, it simultaneously indicates that the mitzvahs will be operative. Why? Because it's talking about tithing to Aaron. So Aruch LaNer, one of the commentaries, notes this contradiction between the two Gemaras. The one in Nida and the other, right? And the other in Sanhedrin. The one implying that mitzvahs will not, the one suggesting that mitzvahs will not apply, the other saying yes. So he answers by saying as follows: it really depends on what phase. During the initial stage of resurrection, people will be learning Torah and fulfilling it in a physical sense. But as the world moves further and further away from the resurrection, and the world to come really sets in, at that point, people will no longer be fulfilling the mitzvot. Why? The purpose of the mitzvot really is to perfect a person's soul in order to get him to the Gan Eden and to the world to come. But once through the mitzvos, he's already there, so the need for the mitzvos really becomes obsolete. You don't need them to connect anymore. You've already used them to connect, and now you're connected. And you don't need them to maintain your connection because there's no Yetzer Hara either. So for that reason, ultimately, this is the suggestion that while Torah will continue and last forever, the performance of the mitzvahs won't. Why is this? Because the Torah, right? The Torah is like the knowledge of God, but it's not the venue through which you attain the merit to connect to Him. That's already taken place. You're in the world to come. So the mitzvahs you won't know, you won't need, they will be shed. Torah learning will continue. The last thing that we want to finish off with is that the question is, is what we said before about the laws of the Torah being everlasting also necessarily true, or might there be some point where even the laws of the Torah, meaning the study of the Torah, will change? So there's a Gemara which is in Eruvin, and the verse is as follows. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, what is the meaning of the verse, which I command you to do today? Today you shall do it, tomorrow you shall not do. The mitzvahs are applicable all days. Rather, it means the time to do the commandments is today, in this world, but not tomorrow in the world to come. So this implies, yes, that as we said, the commandments themselves will be abrogated. You will not need them anymore. And mitzvah is related to the word savat, which means a connector, a connection. However, the Torah learning, that is the wisdom of God, that will be forever. Why? Because that is like communing with God. And in order to enjoy the presence of God, as we're told the righteous will do in the world to come, they will be basking in the glory of God with crowns of glory around their head. That's all referring to the knowledge of Torah that people have and will continue to exist after the world of resurrection, even though they're no longer performing the mitzvahs, the teachings of the Torah in the practical sense of performing the mitzvahs, but the knowledge of the Torah remains like a crowning glory with which they bask in the presence of the glory of God in the world to come. And with these ideas, let us hope and wish and pray that we merit the world to come speedily in our days, as we say. Amen.